Hello, everybody. I'm Pau Giner, and I've been working for the Wikimedia Foundation as a designer for a while. And some of the recent projects I've been working on are kind of acting like bridges, connecting different wikis, different communities, different languages. Let's see some quick examples. Here we have cross-wiki notifications, where it, it's a project that allows people to discover what's going on in other wikis. So, for example, if I'm a French Wikipedia editor, I can know what happened to my images in Commons without having to go there. I can get those notifications directly from my usual Wikipedia. Another example is compact language links, where we are trying to make easy for users to navigate across different languages when reading Wikipedia articles by surfacing the languages that they use more often, and providing mechanisms for them to find other languages too. And last example is content translation, where we are providing a tool that allows people to create new articles in Wikipedia by translating content from other articles, so that they can reuse the effort that the community put in creating those contents. And working those projects is really great, because you can see the impact it has to the different people in our community. Here's, for example, a quote from a Wikipedia editor using content translation that made him feel more productive creating content. But I think that the greatest thing is to see how the multiplying effect of the community makes the impact much bigger. So, for example, here we've seen that the Medical Translation Task Force, a group of people translating articles about health, discovered that they were also more productive with content translation. What that means is that there will be more coverage of health related topics in more languages that can result in a big impact to many people. However, in these projects or with any project, there is a really key moment, and that's when this project gets exposed to our users, and you wonder if it's gonna work well or not. And the feelings around that moment, I try to capture them in a short video that could be representative, I think. So basically, what I was saying, you are never sure if you're gonna be hit by a train or everyone is gonna be happy about the product until you see it working in the user's hands. But there is some way that you could at least try to anticipate that exposure as early as possible, so that you have time to correct course. And that's basically the goal of the design process. So you may have heard about this with many names, like user experience design, design thinking, interaction design. But the core idea is just that. Let's try to anticipate how we expose our ideas to our users and learn from them, so that we can correct course as early as possible. And this is a really simple process that here I'm summarizing as basically understanding the problem, looking for solutions, and evaluate that those solutions work. But the key part is that in each of these stages, it's important to be connected with the user behavior. And that's what it also makes it challenging and hard to apply in practice. So I'm going to share some of the experiences based on the projects I was showing at the beginning. And for each of these stages, and also how to face them, and which is the mindset from which it has been helpful in my experience to think about this. And I think that sharing these perspectives could be useful for anyone participating in this design process. So the first stage, as I've said, is to understand the problem. And one of the key issues that happens more repeatedly is the tendency to jump too early into the solution. So we are basically go to a project and we think we need to build a bridge, but what we need to do is to step back and think which is the real need behind that bridge. And what we really want to do is to allow to cross the river, and the bridge is just one of many possibilities. And we may find out that maybe creating a ferry service or a gondola, or maybe a specific kind of bridge could be the best solution. But the point here is not to limit ourselves by the inertia of thinking on a specific solution without having defined which is the problem first. So that applies to any part of the process, specifically at the beginning. But in day-to-day activities, like when creating a fabricator ticket, it's always good to think which is the problem we are referring to and try to describe it. When trying to figure out the problem and learning about it, we can come up with many questions that we want to learn from our users. And while human curiosity is unlimited, the resources we have are not, in terms of time and budget, etc. And it's important to identify the really, really key questions that will help us to move the project forward. Something that has been helpful for me is to think in terms of what a given question will help me decide on. So I need to know X to decide about Y. Just to put an example, in content translation, we wanted to know if editors were translating normally the whole article or just a relevant part. And that was really important to identify how they were going to interact with the tool, if we are going to provide an initial translation of the whole thing or allow them to go paragraph by paragraph. And that's the route we took, because we learned that in many cases, users were not translating the whole thing, or it was not worth pressuring them to do so, because they were focused on quality and getting started a new article that could later evolve independently. Another important point about learning, as I've said, is to think of it as a regular activity, not only something that you do at the beginning of the project. And to put also another example related to content translation, at some point we were asked whether it was worth it to provide the tool also to translate into English. And that was a valid question, because English Wikipedia is the language where more content is available. So it was not clear if it was possible to contribute from other languages into English as often. Fortunately, at the beginning of the project, we look for research, and there are many researchers that use Wikipedia to investigate. And we found out that the overlap between languages was smaller than what we thought. So about half of German Wikipedia was covering topics that they were not covered on English Wikipedia. And while that doesn't mean that you need to translate all of those, that indicates that there were more translating opportunities than what we thought initially. And that also helped us to keep an eye when the project evolved, to have metrics and measure and realize that English was in fact the fourth most common language in which people were translating into. So we established this kind of iterative process where we were learning from users, we were identifying key things to measure, and we were keeping track to check whether our assumptions were good or not. Okay, the next stage in this whole design process is to look for solutions. And here it's important to think about the plural form of solutions, because unlike some math problems, when humans are involved, probably there is more than one solution, and the one that you initially had in mind, it may not be necessarily the best. So it's always helpful to think in how many ways can I solve this given problem. And that, although may seem that requires a big upfront effort, it's important to think that it's not necessarily the case. So, for example, when solving one of the many problems that you found in a project, one of the things I like to do is to apply what's known as the crazy eights exercise, which is basically time box yourself for a short period of time. It could be 10 minutes, and try to find from 6 to 8 different solutions for a given problem. And you may realize that the first one is or is not the best option, but it helps you to see the problem from different perspectives and consider alternatives that later you may not have the room to change course so easily. And now doing these simple sketches that you set a short time so that you don't get lost into the details, you can consider more options. And as I've said, it's just a little investment in time. Another important point to consider when discussing design is that it's not about the things you like. So I would like to try to avoid the word like when discussing or presenting design, and instead talk about what works. And I think that the difference that makes is that it kind of forces us to connect the feedback we are providing or the explanations we are giving about a design with the goals of the project. So if you have to say that I think that this doesn't work, you're kind of naturally have the need to fill that sentence indicating in which way you think you will be problems. And that could be useful to identify which are the questions and what you want to learn from your users. So it's clear if your concerns are more about not being discoverable or not being the right metaphor or not being consistent with other aspects of the product. So I think that helps with the communication. Also, another interesting area when thinking about solutions, most of the time we are building tools that have a main purpose. And I think it's also important to think on the aspects around those tools, not only on what they do exactly. So, for example, if we are here, we were providing a tool to translate, but we were also caring about how users find articles to translate, realizing that most of the time they were looking for the list of languages to see if an article was missing, and it was important to consider adding entry points right there, caring about how people find the tool, also caring about how people are motivated to keep using the tool, not only thinking about the tool itself. And well, here it's a short comment on prototyping. I think this is one of the key parts of the design process, because it's what really allows you to expose an idea to a user without having invested time and effort on it. Basically, the key idea of prototyping is to create like a movie set where things look real enough, but the room may only have the 3 walls that are going to appear in the camera, and they're not even creating the remaining ones because they are not going to be part of that fiction that we are willing to create for the user. So it's important that a prototype is realistic, because that allows you to get the reaction of the user as if the user was really immersed in the real product. But it should contain only the minimum things you really need for creating that fiction. So to put an example, this is a prototype for search. So if the user search for Moai, it just goes to the right place and highlights Moai. But it's just a prototype. So whatever you wrote, it will do the same thing. We just care to create this fiction because we are going to ask the user to search for Moai because we are in control of that scenario. So there is no backend, there is no real text. It's all based on an image, and so it's all fake. But that's enough to put an user in front of that and see if that's the right model for searching, or we should look for a different solution. And okay, so the third stage of the process, last one, is checking that things work. So we got that prototype, and as I was saying, we want to put that in front of the users and observe how they are working with it. And observing is again something that we want to do along all the process, and we can do it at the very beginning before we have no solution. We can observe how we're working or current products that we want to improve or similar products. We can observe how the users are working with prototypes, and when we start building our solutions, we can observe how they are working with them. And well, this is an example of a Hangout session with a user of Tamil Wikipedia using the current notification system that was useful to understand different things on how to improve it with cross-wiki notifications. So for example, we learned that users were first looking into the work on the current wiki before being interested on looking on what was going on in other wikis, and that informed more decision of putting the notifications of the current wiki first and then provide the rest as collapsed in one single item at the end of that list. And related to that, it was also important to realize that most of the users were not participating on more than 5 projects at a time, and that was also really useful to inform our strategy to measure things. So we wanted to measure if those observations were generalizable and were the norm. So we also combined these qualitative observations with quantitative measurements to see if that observation was the same for the average of our users. Some other things we've learned by interacting with users, and in the case of content translation, it was really interesting to realize from the very first moment we were testing our prototypes that users were concerned with the quality of the translations. They were basically reporting to us that, yeah, this tool seems to be allowing us to be more effective, more efficient, but we don't want automatic translation to clutter or Wikipedias. So it was important for us to put the focus there and look for solutions like measuring how much these initial translations were edited by users to educate them and put the focus on the quality and encourage users to edit content more. There's also one interesting thing. This is about the interaction between designers and engineers, that it's important to be on the same page of this. In many of the cases, when we all like simple solutions for our users, and sometimes the simple solutions means to simplify also the code, but in many cases, simplifying them means remove the complexity from the user and put it into the system. So for example, here, this is a simple interaction where a user is translating and adds more content to the translation paragraph. And you can notice that the source paragraph, it's moving to keep the paragraphs aligned. This is useful for translators because it allows you at a quick glance to see which content is missing and which is the equivalent of which in the translation process. But supporting that technically was quite hard. There were discussions on many different ways to approach it, like let's have multiple scroll bars that get synced automatically, and finally going with the simple solution of just naturally keeping the paragraphs aligned and have just only one way to scroll was something that was so so simple for the user and was easy to prototype, and we were able to see that it felt natural, but it had implications in a lot of work that had to be done in the engineering side of it. So getting engineers involved in this process where you are really able to to find which is the solution that works the best is also helpful to get them to go that extra mile on providing these solutions that may require more work to get a better user experience. Another area I wanted to comment is about how we expose our solutions to our users in terms of gradual deployment. I think it's important to provide a balance between what we expose and to how many people we expose it. To that regard, the beta features platform has been really useful to be able to expose our features initially in an opt-in basis so that users feel invited to provide feedback and they are more willing to accept that the project is evolving and there will be issues. And in the worst case, if they had some problem that it's interfering in their work, they can opt out and continue the old way. And beyond that, it's also important to think how gradually we move from a feature to be inside of this opting area that users need to discover to keep exposing it more visibly. So this is how we were inviting in context editors that were creating a new article to tell them that there is a new way to create articles by translating. And with these graphs, you could see that the moment we start showing those invitations, the adoption of the beta feature increased. So you can be in control of how many users you're exposing your tool in order to avoid getting the same kind of feedback 1 million times, and instead being able to get feedback more gradually and keep improving the tools. So yes, final remarks. As I've said, most of the recommendations that I've been giving are just a matter of having a mindset of understanding which is the role of the design process and what's valuable at each stage. So I think it should not require extra time or extra efforts. And in the long run, I think that having these considerations in mind helps us actually to go faster because we know where we are going more clearly. And we have a more gradual course control instead of just being hit by a train. And finally, as I've said, this is a process that requires the participation of everyone. So you're welcome to participate, and if you have a designer at hand, would be really happy to coordinate and help moving this process forward. But as I've said, it requires participation of all of you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Any question from anyone on the room, on the Hangout, on the IRC?
Hello. Okay, so just quickly, can you list again the steps you identified for the design process?
Yeah, I was basically trying to summarize it in kind of three big blocks, like understanding the problem, exploring solutions, and then evaluating that those solutions work. Also connected with building the project and evaluating that the whole project is meeting those goals.
What would you consider the most challenging one? maybe in general, or maybe with your experience at the foundation?
Yeah, I think that probably understanding well the problem is what is one of the most critical things, because if you fail there, you may end up putting a lot of effort and doing a really great job on solving the wrong problem, and then the end result is something that didn't really fit the the user needs, and that's kind of what results normally in most wasted effort, and it's harder to correct later. And obviously there is always, I mean, you could always wish for having more time and understand better. That's a never ending process. But I think that even done with a very agile way, I think it's really good to try to state which is the problem you're going to solve. Try to involve people at that point in time as early as possible.
Okay, so I think it was interesting to you know, suggest to create multiple solutions, you know, and like before identifying one solution, try to identify many of them, and basically zoom out and compare them and see which one works better. I think it was also good to emphasize on working. Like what that's also like somehow to like remove bias, you know, a bit in the solution and the one you're trying to identify. So how could you also make sure that the problem you identify in the first place is actually like the right problem? So basically, like, is there a similar concept for understanding the problem, like maybe trying to list several issues and trying in the end to like rate them and say, okay, like this is probably like the main problem that our users have, because a lot of users might have a lot of different problems.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things there is to try to make explicit your assumptions. So, for example, when you are exploring solutions, um, there there is also a technique which is it's about conceptual frameworks. So you're basically trying to identify um, which are the high level directions that you can go. And so, for example, let's imagine that we are creating a presentation software, and you could say, okay, there is an edge that can go from try to make things fully automated to have full control. So let's imagine how the tool would be in these extreme cases or in intermediate positions. And so that kind of helps you to avoid having those bias, that even if I really think that we should go to a really automated way, I am kind of forced to explore the whole spectrum. And then having that connected with the project goals and scenarios is also useful, because if I define a scenario, like I say, okay, I have a user that translates the whole article from start to end, and then I identify some of the goals and I create solutions based on those goals. When I'm testing with users, I will see that those fail. And if I have this traceability, that will help me to understand why they are failing. And I may realize that some of these assumptions were wrong, and I can correct. So I think that having this connection between the goal and the directions you are exploring is what helps you to get into that cycle of improving the process.
I tend to agree with you. I think what this is also showing is that there needs to be a pretty big phase before actually like getting to any sort of solution, or before implementing any solution, to really make sure of the problem and identify different implementation paths, and have like another cycle with the users with some visual prototype to make sure it actually like answers their problem, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure about the big part of it. I think that the most important thing is to consider these aspects and go through them. You can spend more or less time. There is currently there was a very interesting book from designers at Google that they were approaching this as design sprints. They are basically picking one problem and going through all these stages in the 5 days of a work week. They just schedule the testing sessions for Friday on Monday, and they start on Monday. They analyze the problem, they explore solutions on Tuesday, they create prototypes on Thursday and test them on Friday. It may sound really extreme, but if you see that they are applying it for real products in just 1 week, that kind of shows that this is a process that can scale. You can say, okay, let's spend instead of doing in 1 week, 2 weeks, but it doesn't has to be necessarily a big upfront effort that we that can slow the whole project.
So basically, it doesn't have to be a long process. It just needs to be
Yep.
done. Yeah. Okay. I like it. Just one more question. Like, when we're identifying solutions, it's a bit complicated sometimes to think what is the audience and how to include also like everybody. And I'm thinking, for example, all the users that don't have JavaScript, the mobile users versus desktop users. So, like, kind of, is it like one problem after another? So you just focus on one platform and then like tackle another problem, or what you would recommend? I would recommend personally to go with the toughest problem, like the most complicated one. So which would be probably a mobile user without JavaScript, and try to identify a solution for this person, and then I will basically just enhance the user experience with other users that have a bigger screen or that have JavaScript. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it depends on which is your target audience for your project. So, for example, when we were doing projects with the language team for language support, we had clearly in mind that it was really important to test with users that were that were using different writing systems. So we look for a big diversity there. I I agree on the one hand, in our context, I think we should give some priority to make sure that our system works for the highest diversity of users, and give more focus to those that have constraints in accessing information by in terms of device connectivity and other circumstances. But yeah, that depends a lot on the project, because you want also to check that your solution works with the biggest group of your target audience. So also you need to be aware of which is the representative group, which is the extreme, and how much you want to, which balance you want to provide between including all of them and serving the majority of your users in the best way. So yeah, depends a bit from project to project.
Okay, yeah. In regards to user tests, what were your with what kind of user tests did you have good experience in regards to time spent to set them up and output?
Well, we have been doing a lot of remote usability testing using Google Hangouts. As I've said before, I think that it's important to have a realistic experience. It's been fun. Some of the prototypes, sometimes users thought that they were a real system, like being afraid of creating or modifying an article, and you had in those cases to indicate that that was not going to be safe on Wikipedia. But I think that the key is to, if you are able to provide a clear scenario without guiding the user too much. It's a scenario where you set the goal in a way that the user knows how to move to there, and the prototype is realistic enough to recreate that experience. That's really that's really useful. And one important thing about the usefulness of those tests is to have also in mind that the goal is not for the user to succeed. I mean, it's totally fine if they fail. It's about the learning. So I think that the important thing is that once you make sure that the artificial things of the prototype are not there, interfering, once the user is failing, that provides a lot of information, and you can learn a lot by asking things like, okay, what were you expecting to happen, instead of uh, what you got, that you were surprised. So I think that these factors are important for being able to get useful information.
And you had those experiences, those good outcomes also already with a smaller number of users tested, or is there like a breakpoint where you said, okay, a break even of users involved in your testing?
Yeah, there is yeah, there is discussion about the ideal numbers of users to test. Normally, I agree with that metric on thinking of between 3 and 5 users to get insights, but as part of a continuous process. So basically, the idea is that, let's say that you have time and resources to test with 30 users for the whole project. If you do a really big usability study with 30 users to check how an idea works, you're going to find with a lot of precision which are the problems. But later, if you fix them, you don't know if the thing went to become better, or maybe worse, or maybe you're generating other problems. So it's a much more effective technique to test with 3, and if they are hitting against the same big rock, then remove that rock and then go other. Let's put other 3 users to go through the same path until you are making it more fluent. And obviously, there may be some issues that may be specific to a specific person. We cannot make things work perfectly from minute one to everyone. But I think that the better balance between resources and outcome is to do repeated testing with smaller groups.
Thank you.
Working? Yes. So back to user testing. So the design research team, they not so long ago defined the personas, and like for example, the most very active editor or very active reader, that kind of user types. And is it something that you've been using in your user testing? And if yes, has it been particularly useful? If not, why didn't you use it? And I'm thinking, for example, you're kind of targeting some quite special audience, like for like content translation. So does it make much sense to spend a lot of time, getting feedbacks from people that are not editing, or like people that are just doing vandalism, or that kind of thing? Or maybe for you it was more interesting to actually target very different types of editors, you know, but really like focus on it, just editors, so on kind of like one persona, but like kind of dig down in that persona and try to find one I don't know, like one English editor and one Spanish editor, one young editor, one old editor, or so basically like, were you able to use the kind of personas framework that we have, or for you, did it lack of something, or did you have to be more specific?
Yeah, well, Alan Cooper, the inventor of the persona concept, was basically hesitant to recommend using personas across different projects, like thinking of them as really, really specific of capturing the important aspects for a project. So I think that that's true. However, having said that, having these general personas could be a useful starting point, and it has been useful in recent projects to just pick this general persona and say, okay, this is about advanced editors, so I'm going to pick that persona and I'm going to put it in some really specific scenarios for my project, or I'm going to specialize this into two more specific kinds of users. So I think it's good that we are kind of having a general standard sets of personas, but I don't see that as something that you can just pick and use directly in our project. At least you need to take that and find the relevant scenarios.
Okay, so it's useful like to give a first flavor basically, but then for the actual user testing, you might have to be more precise and target a bit more narrowly.
Yep.
Don't have any question. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thanks for your questions.